conservation, horticulture, in an island perspective of the Missouri Botanical Garden. Most of the examples for this talk will be from a project which we've just started on in Mauritius. So I'm just going to go through some slides here. When most people think of horticulture, these are pictures from the Missouri Botanical Garden, they think of beautiful landscapes, and horticulture is a beautiful landscape. It's of course the practice of cultivation and management of a garden, and Oxford English Dictionary definition. But there's more to meet the eye to horticulture than just pretty plants and pretty landscapes, and you can have both. The quote at the top is a quote that I found in an old scrap of paper, which is a Victorian quote. I found it in the Gardens archive. It says, "Horticulture is the highest of the sciences." And back then in Victorian times, of course, they considered horticulture one of the core sciences. But in truth, horticulture is a combination of many different sciences: ecology, entomology, restoration ecology, soil science. All of this stuff goes into horticulture, as well as the art of landscape design. So it's these things that we can bring to the table as horticulturalists. One thing that makes us special as Botanic Gardens, really, though, is the fact that we can monitor and manage records associated with plants. This is what combines our horticultural skill and the records, which then gives us the ability to influence conservation. And that's very, very important. This is BGCI's definition of what a Botanic Garden is, which is, of course, holding a documenting collection of living plants for purposes of scientific research, conservation, display, and education. So in Missouri, we're very lucky. We think of horticulture as knowledge building and capacity building as well. So we think beyond the bounds of our 76 acres. We maintain the collections, but this is an example of some of the projects the garden has horticulturally been involved with in the last few years. In the last 3 years, we've worked in several different areas with our horticultural skills. So just to show you that we're thinking about that. Back to Mauritius, back to an island project. This is a project that we started in 2014. We got a chance to visit Mauritius and were asked by the Mauritian Wildlife Foundation to take a look at the possibility to partner with them to do conservation of the flora of Mauritius, and also with the government of Mauritius, the national park system. The challenges on Mauritius are pretty significant. These are images of the destruction of the natural habitat. You can see here, this is all this orange is sugarcane plantations. So pretty much all of the lowland vegetation has been wiped out by sugarcane. I won't go through the entire history of Mauritius, though it's very interesting. But I'll just show you these images. And then this is the population. Population of Mauritius is 1.3 million. The size of the island is around 20 miles by 30 miles. So it's a small island with a large population and very little of its natural environment left. You can see here in 1997, the forested land is down to 2% of its natural area. So pretty significant habitat loss. Why Mauritius for us? It has 287 endemic plants, 89% of those are threatened, 89% of those taxa have less than 10 individuals, 19 have less than 5 individuals. There are 5 taxa extinct in the wild, and 61 already extinct in the wild, 61 already extinct in total, and 5 extinct in the wild. So it's one of the top 3 most threatened floras. The way we view horticulture fitting into projects at the Missouri Botanic Garden, we use an integrated approach like Dr. Peter Wise-Johnson was talking about earlier, and how we bring both our science to the table, our taxonomy, our genetic studies, and the horticulture comes in to then propagate and conserve those species. So you can see here a progression of how we identify species with the taxonomy, going through to emergency conservation, propagation and to stem the loss of genetic diversity, ex situ conservation, the development of recovery plans, and then restoration plans. So we're very lucky at the Missouri Botanic Garden to have a full cadre of the skill sets within the garden to be able to implement these. But equally, you could partner with other organizations to achieve a similar strategy of integration of all these. Horticulture fits in primarily here. We have to have this information. We have to know what is rare. We have to know what's IUCN registered. We have to know what the taxonomy is so that we can actually mobilize and gear this up. So emergency propagation and ex situ conservation is critical. And then our knowledge that we gain horticulturally from propagation protocols then also feeds into the development of recovery plans for certain species as well. This is an example of some of the data that we've used as base planning for our horticulture on the island of Mauritius. Of course, the IUCN, the Gallups Research, been involved in the Mass Green Plant Specialist Group, which is redoing the IUCN Red List, the floras that exist, local knowledge. This is Jean-Claude here, showing us where all the plants are. So this is very, very important knowledge for us to move through. There's lots of things that we can do in horticulture to help with conservation. Education and training, improving facilities, implementing technology and processes, direct propagation and cultivation, and in-situ planning and management are some of those things. Collaboration is really, really important. One of the first things we did when we were on Mauritius in 2015 is we pulled a group of all of the everyone with expertise similar to folks sitting in this room, and we said, what is the current knowledge of propagation of these endemic plants? And so we basically sat around the table and spent 2 days going through the entire flora, pulling all of the information on propagation, and we recorded it. So I don't think it had ever been done before, but we sat down. It was a little painful, but it was really good. We got lots of data and a base place to work from, to build from. So it was really, really useful. And then looking at ideas and processes. So training in field collection data, collections management, setting up shared Google Docs on computers so that we can talk to one another more effectively, pruning and nursery practices are some of the key things that we were sharing in our interactions on Mauritius. And we learn a lot too as far as some of the constraints and some of the processes that we need to work with in Mauritius and what weeks to curate this process as well. These are the Forestry Service and the Wildlife Service on Rob Reed's actually pulling apart one of our collecting books because they all wanted pages of it to learn how to use the collecting book for data collection. We wanted to be able to increase the capacity of propagation on the island of Mauritius, and it's relatively cheap to put in good propagation facilities. They don't have to be fancy. You really just need to get some facilities there to be able to root some of the critically endangered species. This is a nursery mist propagation bed that we put in up at a place called Pigeon Wood, which is in the national park. We wanted to get some bottle heat in so that we could actually increase the success of rooting. So we took some tools and equipment from Missouri. We ordered some from the UK. We got them all to Mauritius, and then spent this took us about a day to put this together. So it didn't take that long to put a functioning mist bed. It's now the only functioning mist bed on the island of Mauritius. But it gives us the capacity to do that. It wasn't that expensive, so it's a very good way to increase the capacity. As horticulturists, when we encounter a plant in the field, we think a little bit differently than taxonomists and restoration ecologists. We're thinking about the environment that the plant is in. We want to learn how to grow that plant. We don't just simply want to record its occurrence and odd weather conditions. We want to know enough detail to be able to give us a leg up on being able to generate a propagation protocol for that plant, successfully grow it, successfully cultivate it. On this side of the slide, you see here we're thinking about soil structure, soil pH, aspect, climate, microclimate. All of this stuff is going through your head because these are questions that you can ask every time you encounter a plant in a given situation. This is a mountain on Mauritius called the Pouce, the thumb, and this is the Cylindrocline commercially. There are 10 of these left. Right here. Before we go out into the field, we need to gather all the information. So we need information from floras, we need rarity assessment, we need any historical records and taxonomic records, occurrences from herbarium records, all give us a place to start to be able to say, we're going to look here for this particular plant and go and figure out how to propagate it. This stuff happens during the time you're in the field as well, because you may not have all the information, but you can gather it while you're working too. And then from the individual plant perspective, so we're thinking about this, we're thinking about the environment here, but we're also thinking about the type of plant that we're looking at to generate propagation protocol. It's no good as just taking cuttings from it and hoping. We have to understand what its life cycle, we have to understand its growth habit, whether it sets much seed, its growth characteristics, In the particular case of Cylindrocline commercial, it doesn't set very many seeds. It's got very low seed stems, so it's not a great root from cuttings. So really the only way to look at this plant is micropropagation, and of course we're going to try some crossbreeding between the 10 that's left to see if we can generate some viable seed. That's not likely, so this is a good solution will be micropropagation probably for this species based on what we know. This slide is slightly confusing, but it's actually a practical example of what Patrick was talking about. So when we're looking at mother plants in the field, the important thing horticulturally is that we can tie these back to restoration. So remember, we're thinking bigger than just the ex situ collections of the Missouri Botanic Garden, holding these things in trusts and saying, okay, we've got them in collections, we've got one in this collection. We want to put these things back. So in order to do that, we have to think bigger and larger scope on our data collections. So we've got here, say there's 3 of these individual plants left. We want to collect material from each one of these individuals, so they become individual mother plants. And so what we've done with our database recording system is we track mother plant data totally separately from the record, the accession record itself, which gives us the way to tie in multiple years of accessioning into one mother plant. So you can see here with this example, we've collected seed in 2016 and 2015 and given them different accession numbers, but it's tied into that mother plant, original mother plant, as are these cuttings we took in 2015 and the grafting we took in 2014. So we can always tie it back to this individual. And the other 3 individuals are the same. And this becomes very, very important when we bring them into ex situ conservation here. So these cuttings have made it through to ex situ conservation in a garden setting. And you can see here the original accession numbers made it through, and they're eventually going to make it through to population restoration. So we can ensure the genetic material from each one of these individuals makes it into that restoration. And then we can take these 3 genetic individuals in a controlled situation, hybridize them to get the maximum genetics of it, and add that to the restoration too, so that we've got, when we're dealing with critically endangered species down to 10 or 15, we can ensure we've got every ounce of genetic material going back into the field. So that's where horticulture can really, really help you. We've got this secondary propagation cycle, so when we've got these individuals, we've got cuttings that we were successful with here, we can then bulk those up and then produce those for the restoration project. So the slide is confusing, but it's a practical process that we use to achieve the goal of actually getting things into restoration processes. And of course, it's critical that we collect data on propagation as well. We as horticulturists, we tend to think, okay, I just want to play with the plant. I want to learn how to grow the plant. And generations of horticulturists perhaps haven't written down as much data as they should have. And I think we need to look at that as a group and say that we need to be able to record propagation data very, very effectively. This is a map of Mauritius. And we're using both public and private nurseries and here for capacity building for putting plants back into the field. So these are government nurseries, Forestry Service and National Park, and then we've got the Mauritian Wildlife Foundation nursery, and then private estates that do some land management processes that also can contribute to having nursery space and grow plants out, as long as they keep good records in doing so. And when we talk about good records, we want to be able to make this replicable. Patrick was talking about how many people consider themselves scientists. Well, I think all horticulturists should consider themselves scientists, because the data that's collected, although it may not be statistical in all cases, practical data is very, very useful. So reporting the soil type, the container type, the temperature that you're sowing things at, what pest control you've done, rooting hormone concentrations, and doing it in a way that's repeatable is very, very critical to being able to be successful. So we didn't just simply say, we're going to take cuttings of this cylindrocline, and we're going to take one set of cuttings. We would take 50 cuttings, at least 10 of each, and then do multiple trials of rooting hormone and see which one actually worked best, and document that through the process for every single species that we did. And as we become successful, we can fine-tune that. And what that looks like for us here in our living collections management software is tracking that particular process. So you can see here, this is not an example based on a Mauritian plant, but but it is a good example here. So you can see here we've got pre-treatment. We're saying we imbibed it in water, we soaked it. We've got standard recipes, several standard recipes we use for soil, which we attach to the record. And you can see here the percent success rate that we've had in germinating and what containers they've ended up in, along with what soil they're in. So we've collected all this information and all the steps along the way, and that is then tied to the record, and we can print this out as a propagation protocol for every species that we've worked with. So particularly for the Mauritius project, for island conservation, this becomes very, very critical for generating information for those critically endangered species that we can then share with everybody. So we get to this piece here. So we've recorded our propagation. We've done a really good job at collecting all of those field notes. We've collected enough information to know where it was. We've collected the information about the environment itself. We've got the standard information like location, GPS coordinates. But we've also got enough information to be able to grow that plant, at least start to be able to grow it in cultivation. And then we come to this side of things here, which is also very, very important. This also can become complicated too. And on Mauritius, we are looking at several different sites to be able to help us achieve ex situ conservation. So thinking beyond botanic gardens, we've got both public and private spaces that can participate in holding plant collections to hold the genetic diversity of Mauritius. 289 with many genetics of each that are important. We can't hold them at Missouri. Certainly each one of these sites couldn't hold every single one, but together they can hold nearly every single one of those species. So I'm confident that we can actually find homes for everything ex situ while we deal with the restoration challenges. So you can see here some of the sites that we've selected on Mauritius to look at partnering with to be able to achieve that. When you look at ex situ collections management, you need to think about processes of making sure that you don't get hybridization within those processes as well. So one way is keeping things very, very separate like this, making sure that you label everything correctly in your ex situ collections. You can have individuals, so each one of these could be individually genetically distinct, and it's somewhat easier with trees, somewhat easier with palms. When you get to herbaceous plants, you get a big mess of a problem because you've got lots of interhybridization, lots of growing into one another, so it's orders of magnitude more complicated. But you can have very beautiful landscape gardens that are actually functioning ex situ conservation sites, as long as you label correctly, track each one of these in the collection system, and then make sure that you deal with any seed generation that it's not they're not hybridizing themselves into the collection. So your collections management processes become critical. And this is an example here at Missouri Botanical Garden. You can see how many things are in this little square on the garden's grounds here, according to the living collections management system. Think about microclimate too. Mauritius is small, but it's got significant microclimate changes. You've got the mountains in the Black Forest here in the National Park, Black River Gorges National Park, sorry, with many different habitats. You've got coastal influence along the side here, you've got warm influence here, you've got windswept mountains, sporadic rain behind Port Louis. So you've got lots of different microclimates you have to take into consideration when you're thinking about locating enough for ex situ conservation. There's been lots of talk about resources and figuring out how to grow some of these things. Some people are already doing this stuff for us. Some people are already managing collections. So you've got hotels, you've got golf courses, you've got streets and cityscapes. People are putting money and resources into maintaining plants in these areas. So as botanical gardens, interested individuals, if we can incorporate plants into these landscapes and then track them, we can have the benefit of other people's maintenance, and we can train the staff in these locations to do it, even shopping. Lots of potential for that on Mauritius. So although hotels may not give directly money to help with conservation projects, they can help by supporting specimens within their landscapes. And there is a role for ex situ conservation at the Missouri Botanical Garden and all this too, where we can bring things in and then really use a controlled environment at the garden to learn about how to grow some of the species. So the power of collections record keeping is critical. And these are some of the records, pictures of record systems that we took on Mauritius. But we've gone a step further on Mauritius, and we said, well, if we look at the process of being able to track records on an island-wide basis, let's think about tracking records for every single organization that's working for conservation on Mauritius or the flora. Let's think about tracking records of National Park Service, Forestry Service, private NGOs, Missouri Botanic Garden, all putting data into one system. So essentially making Mauritius a garden in itself. So we're tracking propagation on several different sites by several different organizations, which is relatively easy. It's something that we do at the Botanic Garden for ourselves, working on different sites. Why not scale it up to an island project? So we've generated a variant of our database called the Mauritius Island Plant Conservation Project, and these are species that are in conservation projects in Mauritius currently, and we're looking at implementing this on an island-wide basis for Mauritius. And you can see here, this is an example of a mother plant record here. This is Phacelia cataractes. There is one of these left in the wild. It's very sad, unfortunately. But you can see the data tracking associated with that species. GIS and GPS play a critical role in all this as well. These are locations of individuals that we've tracked. So when we put things back in the wild, we want to be able to track those individual genetics and woody plants as well. So both tracking as we collect, so we can track and tag those mother plants with hyper-accurate GPS, but also putting plants back in, we want to track those genetics too, continuing woody plants. GIS also gives us, GIS is basically multi-layered maps that gives you the ability to overlay information. So looking at the bottom example here, you can see this is a soils map of Mauritius. The soils give us a key as to where those plants may occur, but also where we should put ex-situ conservation sites as well. So lots of ways that you can map and track and use GPS effectively as conservation. Secondly, increasing, well, one of the last things we talk about is increasing capacity. You don't actually have to be there entirely all the time. You can actually hand off kits and provide training. And these are some of the information booklets, some of the recording supplies, and some of the kits that we hand out for others to be able to boost the capacity to collect plants effectively in the field. And then we live in an age where we can all talk to one another across thousands and thousands of miles. So although Mauritius is on the other side of the world, you guys can all talk to them about what they're doing. We can talk to you about what we're doing. So the types of communication that's out there now shouldn't stop us from talking about collaboration and sharing experiences on an ongoing basis. I had to put some plants in at the end of the slide here. So these are some of the amazing flora of the Mauritian islands. This, of course, is the model palm. This is the team we went up to Mauritius with in 2015. This is Hyaphobia Botanicalis, which was down to about 50 individuals on an island called Bound Island, just off the coast of Mauritius. So there's some beautiful plants in here. I'm going to stop very soon. This is Xanthum paniculatum, which is down to 2 large individuals left. The Nesocodon here, which Dr. Gilbert Jackson brought into Botanic Gardens cultivation. There's about 250 of these left in one location on Quebec. So some very special plants, some very unique conservation opportunities here. And we think that working together as a group with the National Park Service, with the Forestry Service and the private NGOs, we can attain a level of 35 critically endangered species in ex-situ conservation. That's all of their genets. Remember, we're talking about 10 individuals there, 15 individuals there. A year until we get to 8 years until we've conserved all of the critically endangered species on Mauritius. I think it's possible to do this.